Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I'm your host, Edgar Mills. Thank you for joining us. Hello, good people. Welcome to episode 46 of the Junto Podcast. Thank you so much for staying with me. I appreciate you guys. So today, what are we talking about? Today, we are comparing our current state of politics and the legal, politics with the law from Frederick Bastiat, who, we'll get to it. So I quote, life, faculties, production. In other words, individuality, liberty, and property precede all human legislation and are superior to it. Yeah, that was from the law. Compare that to today. Just never-ending government spending, regulatory overreach in every sector, no matter what. And then the gradual erosion of our personal liberties, but also our individual responsibility in the modern age of, the welfare state and things like that. So the law, written by Frederick Bastiat in 1850, and folks, it was every bit as brilliant now as it was then. It's good stuff, and you should read it. It's short. It's a short sort of essay outline. It kind of reads a little bit like a textbook even, and it goes on against the use of state force or state coercion for anything other than protecting natural rights. Bastiat was a French economist, and he warned strongly that turning the law into a tool for legal plunder will absolutely destroy our society, as it looks like it's doing, right? I mean, it has been for decades, and it's just continues on. So we'll look at the principles that he outlines in the law, and then we'll compare and contrast to modern U.S. politics, and we'll expose how the modern U.S. government is bastardizing anything that may have been written from Bastiat. And then I'll offer my sort of what I call clean bill fixes, right? I'm all about the clean bill. I think they should pass a clean bill that says all bills have to be clean bill. One subject, one topic. Instead of having these 8,000 page documents just full of all sorts of hidden nonsense, or tying some spending that has nothing to do with a program you're trying to get passed, but tying some other spending to it. And that's the reason everybody hates on Massey, and everybody hates on the more libertarian-leaning politicians in Congress, is because they refuse to support these gigantic bills that encompass all this spending. The title of the bill will refer to one thing, but it's greasy the way it shakes out. I think clean bills would be one of the first steps in restoring, transparency for sure, trust in our legislators, maybe. So Bastiat says the proper function of the law is to uphold justice in defense of our God-given rights. Now, you guys know, not so much these days about the French, right? But back in the 1800s, the French were all about liberty, right? Democracy, and that kind of thing. So I quote again from the law. What then is the law? It's the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. The law is the organization of the natural right of lawful defense. So it's just a collective of individuals exercising individual rights. So what that means is common force, this collective force, is to do only what the individual forces have a natural and lawful right to do. And that's where it goes south today, folks. That's where it goes south. Because the collective, once our corrupt politicians, once they all agree upon a thing, it makes no difference whether or not it has a bearing on us. And it does have a bearing on us, by the way. We have to pay for it. So common force is not meant to do anything that individual force doesn't have a natural and lawful right to do. And that is to protect the person, the liberties of that person, and the properties of that person. Yeah, that's it. Individual justice is collective justice, folks. But once the collective gets a hold of it, it goes south. That's the way it is. So Bastiat's writings, they align with the Constitution, or the preamble for sure, and the Declaration of Independence perfectly well. And I'm sure he used those two documents as references as he was writing these things. I'm not sure when the law exactly was written. I know it was published in 1850, but and modern sort of libertarian leaning talking points and politicians like Rand Paul or Massey or whatever, who rallies against the nanny state, that they take a lot of principles from Bastiat. Yeah. So since the 1900s, the early 1900s, the government has deviated, right? The government's been deviating. Again, I always say that it started to go downhill somewhere around the Whiskey Rebellion, which was in this like 1790 something. But especially ever since the early 1900s, especially since what? The 16th Amendment, right? The friggin' Federal Reserve, the enactment of the Federal Reserve. And then especially in the 30s with the New Deal expansions from FDR. The federal government has morphed into, instead of a protector of our rights, it's just a middleman and a redistribution factory for our money. So throughout World War II, in the building of the welfare state, and into the 60s, when we got all the Great Society programs from LBJ, the law just, our literal law just became a machine to churn out subsidies. And the government started funding everything, from friggin' corporate bailouts to student loans to welfare, and any line there was between, voluntary charity and then coercive taxes kind of got smudged and erased. Folks, I'm not against charity as long as it's voluntary. That's it. That's the metric. It must be voluntary. We don't voluntarily pay taxes, folks. I guarantee you, given an option, 90% of America would opt out. So what can we do what kind of bill could I propose? What kind of clean bill could I propose to fix this stuff? Well, we can make a constitutional amendment or statute that limits the federal powers back to what the enumerated powers as they were written in Article 1, Section 8, and put any of these other general welfare programs, put a sunset date on. I mean, like 2 years, 3 years, something where it's not just a never-ending program. 6 years max. So I think Congress has 6-year terms. So any general welfare program, at minimum, needs to be looked at every 6 years, and like automatically sunset. And if it doesn't get looked at, gone, it's gone. And then if they want something to be permanent, it's got to go just like the amendment process, 2/3 congressional vote, state ratification. And then how do you enforce those things? Well, just audits, the various commissions within Congress, these commissions that have veto power over the budgets for these programs. Yeah. And any of those budgets that exceed 10% of the gross domestic product on non-defense functions, they can veto it. So, and that's what everybody says, right? Congress has the power of the purse, and that is correct. They're just too corrupt because they wheel and deal. But if you had clean bills, they wouldn't be able to wheel and deal as much. There wouldn't be as much. There would be maximum transparency, and they would have to go on record for one thing, one topic. And that's it. There you go. So, enumerated powers of Congress. Let's look at it a little bit. I'm not trying to do a civics lesson here. I just want to hit some things. The Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, uniform nationwide, to pay debts and for the common defense. And then this is where the liberals love it. And then it says, and to promote the general welfare. Now, they've taken that and run with it, right? They will scrutinize the hell out of the Second Amendment for grammatical errors and whatever. But they take the phrase to promote the general welfare and run with it. Congress has the power to borrow money on credit of the United States. Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the states, and also with Indian tribes, folks, and also with Indian tribes. Congress has the task to establish uniform rules for naturalization and bankruptcy laws also. Why they put those together is beyond me, but they do. Congress is responsible for immigration and naturalization, good people. So all this stuff you see going on today, you can yell at Trump all you want. You can hate on ICE dudes for being too gung-ho, but it's Congress's job to regulate naturalization and immigration. Congress has the power to coin money and regulate the value of said money and fix weights and measurements. But what did Congress do in 1913? What did Congress do in 1913? They ceded that power. They created the Federal Reserve to coin money and regulate its value. So Congress no longer has a power in that. That is solely the federal reserve function. And is the Federal Reserve a government function? No, it absolutely is not. It's a private entity, good people. So for whatever reason, whatever wheeling and dealing went on in Jekyll Island in 1913, once the law got passed, Congress gave away the power to coin money and regulate its value. And then it's Congress's job to punish counterfeiting of U.S. securities and coin, which they could arguably punish the chairman of the Federal Reserve, because they're essentially counterfeiting money every time they print money. They're devaluing our money at any rate. What else does Congress have the power to do? Well, establish post offices and post roads. That is a congressional function, even though the post office loses millions of dollars a year. Yep. That's Congress's job. And guess what? That happened before income tax came along, folks. Yep. And then Congress has the power over patents and copyrights. Not the power over, but to regulate. To promote science and the arts by securing limited time exclusive rights for authors and innovators. Congress has the power to constitute tribunals or courts that are, don't exceed they're below the superior court or the Supreme Court. So any court doing business does so under the authority of Congress. So all these activist judges out in San Francisco, what is that, 9th District or something? All these activist judges, the Congress can dissolve those courts, good people. They can't dissolve the Supreme Court. Nope, they can't. And Congress has no authority over local municipalities. But all these other big federal court districts and whatnot, yeah, Congress has the power over those lower courts. Congress has the authority to fine and punish piracy, yep, felonies on the high seas, and offenses against the laws of nations. And then war powers, clearly. Congress, not the president, Congress has the power to declare war, issue letters of marque and reprisal, and to regulate capture on land and water. So what we do with captured enemies, right? Congress has the power to declare war, not the president. Now check this out. I periodically I bring this up to people, but Congress has the power to raise and support armies. But guess what? Those appropriations were they were limited to 2 years only. So if we're being legitimate here, the defense budget, the military, with the exception of the Navy is the only named military force that's meant to be maintained permanently. The Navy. And with that, the Navy, underneath the Navy falls the Marines. But the Army and Air Force and all that stuff, they're meant to be relooked at every 2 years. Now, I don't know that the Army's ever passed an audit, but my point is this. We've taken things for granted, and we've drifted over the past 200 and whatever years, 50, we've drifted away from the Constitution as it was written. And then Congress makes laws of land warfare and naval warfare and all that stuff. And then Congress has the power to call forth militias to enforce laws, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, to organize, arm, and discipline these militias. And then the states appoint officers and do the training. Now, this is a paraphrased version of this, but is a militia truly a militia if it's under Congress? I mean, absolutely not, right? Do the states have the authority to raise militias? And even then, is the National Guard, see, we can go back, this is a whole nother episode, but the National Guard, good people, is not a militia. And then what else? What else does Congress do? They have legislative power over the District of Columbia, right? They built to create a federal district, which they did, up to 10 square miles via state session. So, yep, Washington, D.C. was created under Congress. And then other stuff too, other on military bases and things like that, with state consent. And then there's one, again, I'm paraphrasing, necessary and proper clause, the elastic clause. This is one that allows, this is where the founding fathers were clever enough to sneak in these things that could be shaped and reshaped as we go, to make all laws necessary and proper for executing the above powers and other constitutional duties. Yeah, the elastic clause, I think, needs to be gone via constitutional amendment. So what's legal versus illegal plunder? When we think of plunder, we think of pirates, right? Pirate ships and whatnot. That's what I think of. As per Bastiat, and I quote, "See if the law takes from someone or some persons what belongs to them and gives it to other persons to whom it does not belong. See if the law benefits one citizen at the expense of another by doing what the citizen himself cannot do without committing an injustice. when a portion of wealth is transferred from the person who owns it without his consent and without compensation, then I say that property is violated, that an act of plunder is committed. That was Bastiat in 1950, good people. That is just common practice. That is just what we do. That is income tax and every other tax that we pay involuntarily on every single paycheck. Yeah. Compared to modern politics, right? Everybody carries on, especially it's odd that the liberals, they carry on about tax the rich and eat the rich and all those things. And then, of course, the right wing calls rich people the job creators, which may or may not be true, right? But the Democrats love like progressive tax, and they want the more money you make, the more tax you got to pay, which is kind of the way it is now. And then you got some Republicans out there who call that socialism, which I kind of agree with. But both sides engage in this sort of selective outrage and this selective plunder. They both plunder, but one side plunders by well, they both the same way. Subsidies for their chosen little pet projects. All these green energy subsidies and these electric car subsidies and blah, blah, blah. But then on the other side, you get farm subsidies, right? So they will pay a farmer to grow certain crops. Whether or not that's what this farmer, started out doing or not, it's whatever the government's going to pay, he's probably going to do. Else risk going out of business, right? Going under. Which is how and why Farm Aid came to be back in the 80s. So both sides, they both have their pet project. They both have ways that they plunder. Because believe me, these subsidies going to whichever side, there's kickbacks, folks. There's kickbacks. You don't have to believe me. You can research it if you want. That's the comparison to modern politics. Our government deviation from these principles of the Constitution and the law, Bastiat's the law, they're never more clear than they are in FDR's New Deal. Because what came from the New Deal? Social Security, 1935. I say it. I always say it. I'll continue to say it. Social Security is the biggest scam perpetrated on America ever. And Bastiat defines it clearly as legal plunder. Yeah. And Social Security, well, I mean, it's got unfunded liability. Right now, current unfunded liabilities are somewhere upwards of $100 trillion. Unless a whole bunch of people die real soon, yeah, they can't. It's gonna run out of money, and we all know this. It's coming. They want to hang on to it. They want to use it as a campaign arguing point, but it's coming. And then when it runs out of money, then what? All these old people that was told, oh, it's Social Security, it's your safety net. When you can retire and you don't have to work anymore. And now you see all these people when you're watching your morning news, and there was some kind of major event, and you got some old lady on there. I'm on a fixed income. I'm on the Social Securities. I only get $438 a month. Yeah, man. Well, that's Social Security for you. Some money guy, and I can't remember who it was, did a comparison. If you take from the time you start working, because that's when you pay. Once you have a legal, legitimate job, you're paying into Social Security. If all the money you put into Social Security, if that were going into a commercial, IRA, for instance, Roth IRA, you're over the course of your life, when you hit 65, you would have like a few $1 million saved up. And then that few $1 million spread out over the rest of you, and your money, by the way, and that's your money. Now, if your spouse dies, you collect their Social Security. But if you're a single guy and you die, who gets your Social Security? What if you have kids? What if you're divorced or a widower? And you're in your 60s, maybe 62, 63. have a heart attack because you drink heavy and you don't exercise. You have a heart attack and die, and you got kids in their 20s, 30s struggling. Well, where's all your money gone? Well, it was your money. You paid into it for the guarantee that you'd get something out of it. And then you checked out early before you were able to collect. It's just, yeah, well, that's going to somebody else now, isn't it? Very potentially an illegal alien. Tell me if that isn't plunder, what is? If that isn't legal plunder, what is? Yeah, Social Security should go away. We can, comment, you know what I mean? Hit me up. And then what happened in 2008? Yeah, the financial crisis, the bailouts, the troubled asset recovery program, where taxpayers, you and me, covered all of these too big to fail Wall Street hedge funds and all these people, all these CEOs, by the way, that maintained all their, their bonuses, their yearly bonuses or their whatever performance bonuses. Well, they're too big to fail. That was the catchphrase that was going around. And if that wasn't a clue for you, I tell you, you get clues sometimes that are pretty slap in the face, obvious clues. And I'll give you a recent example. It was Pam Bondi, and it was on the subject, she was getting grilled by a Congress or Senate or whoever, and she says, but the Dow is over 50,000. And we're talking about, child sex trafficking. and she says, yeah, but the Dow is over 50,000. Well, that's what too big to fail. That's the same exact vibe. Right? That's when you knew it was all sham. Well, that was one time. That was a freebie. So what is my clean bill, the no plunder amendment, right? We passed legislation that requires all federal spending to include a plunder impact statement, and that it details in that statement any involuntary transfer, like taxes to specific whatever checks those are meant to be automatically coming out of, right? That's highlighted and detailed. And then any bill where benefits will be distributed to less than 50% of the tax-paying population, then that gets nixed, and that goes to some other thing, block grants or something like that, to the states to go toward voluntary programs, and then give citizens the ability to bring lawsuits against the government for these involuntary programs. Yeah, the plunder statement, actual, detailed, and open to the public, and anything that's going to come out of your paycheck in any way that gets highlighted, and then if it's going to benefit less than 50% of taxpayers, that gets scratched as a tax and goes to some other program to where states can voluntarily manage those programs. All right, let's talk about the law and charity. Well, voluntary charity versus, coerced, forced charity, because that's what, again, taxes, if there's anything charitable about them, it's coerced. If it were voluntary, then you guys would be doing it, right? If you had money to. If you hadn't, okay, never mind. Let's keep going. And I quote Bastiat. You say there are persons who have no money, and you turn to the law. But the law is not a breast that fills itself with milk, nor are the lacteal veins of the law supplied with milk from a source outside the society. Nothing can enter the public treasury for the benefit of one citizen or one class unless other citizens and other classes have been forced to send it in. If every person draws from the treasury the amount that he's put in, it's true that the law then plunders nobody. But this procedure does nothing for the persons who have no money. It does not promote equality of income. The law can be an instrument of equalization only as it takes from some persons and gives to other persons. And I wish I could remember the quote right now. I don't know if you guys know this, but was it Daniel Boone, who was a member of Congress? And he said something to the effect that it's not the government's job. The government is not in the business of charity. That's not what we are meant to do. And this speaks directly to that. This speaks directly to that. And so let me give you, for example, some of these lefties out there, if you guys remember the dude that ran, well, was a candidate, Andrew Yang, came up with the freedom dividend or whatever, essentially universal basic income. There's no voluntarism in that whatsoever. There's plenty of private philanthropy, out there. Where is this universal basic income gonna come from? And who gets it? It says universal basic income. So does that mean does everyone get that? And where does the money come from? Are you just going to hit, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and whoever the other friggin' billionaires are, and make them pay for it year on year? Because they're just going to move. I think there's something along those lines. I want to say that Zuckerberg just moved out of California and possibly to Florida or somewhere. California's taxable income from the state dropped by a literal $1 billion, from $2 billion to $1 billion. That is a hit to the state coffers, folks. So when a billionaire leaves and moves away, well, I don't know if Zuckerberg's a billionaire. Maybe he probably is. So when they move away, you feel it. And guess what, man? They're not going to move to Europe. They're not going to move to France, right? They're not going to move to Canada. They're going to move to friggin' Thailand or somewhere where there's or to friggin' some Caribbean islands down there somewhere, and put all their money somewhere else. So you guys keep saying that. Well, why don't we make them pay? Why don't we make them pay? Well, you can try that, but unfair is still unfair. And if you impose that on them, they're just going to leave. I would. So I don't know where this universal basic income is supposed to come from. But that's what we're talking about here. That's that coerced charity. It's not natural. It's not real. And it's just going to cost somebody else money. I guess if you have no job and no money and the government wants to give you money, yeah, why not? Take it. I can't blame a hustler out on the streets who refuses to work or don't want to work or can't get a job because of a criminal record, or just simply rich, poor, otherwise wants to stand on principle, or just don't want to be told what to do by anyone. Whatever. I can't fault that guy for the government just giving him, I don't know what, $25,000 a year, whatever. I don't know what the numbers that were thrown around were. Universal basic income. If you think that's a good idea, by all means, hit me up. It only sounds good. Do the math. And that coming from somebody who don't math very well. Well, where'd our government go off the rails? Well, England has been doing this for a long time, and they had what was called poor laws back in the day, and they had a lot of influence on some of the laws in America. But it was most visible in the 60s. And again, who was it? LBJ. They came out with the freaking Great Society, the War on Poverty. Well, what did the War on Poverty do, folks? It did the same thing that the War on Drugs did. It just exacerbated a problem. That is all it did. And it created dependency, just like the war on drugs, the war on poverty created dependency. Yep, created dependency. And now we got everybody's, the SNAP. Remember when the SNAP wasn't going to get funded a few months back? And everybody was losing their damn minds. I think it was during some sort of maybe government shutdown sort of thing or something. I can remember and this wasn't that long ago, and everybody was losing their damn minds. Oh, the Republicans are trying to starve the poor people. Well, if you're dependent upon it and you're not truly needy and you are capable of working, but you're just taking it anyway, I guess I can't blame you, though, because the government's stupid enough to just give it out. But things like that get you in a cycle. And it gets you in a dependent state, and it keeps you in a dependent state. And these programs cost $1 trillion plus every year, and somebody's getting fat off of it. The middlemen in there are getting fat off of it. The bureaucrats. Never mind the name. Never mind the senators and the representatives that you know about, but all the faceless bureaucrats that are in the middle. They're seeing some of that. Well, what clean bill does old Edgar propose? Voluntary Aid Restoration Act. Yeah. You can call it whatever you want. Phase out federal welfare programs, over maybe 5 years, and give 100% tax credit to individual private charitable donations. Yep, individual private charitable donations. So if I donate, up to, maybe 50% of your income or even more, possibly. Hell, it depends on how charitable you are. But yeah, you should get a tax credit. If you give to charity voluntarily, then yeah, you should get a tax credit for it. And take the government out of that picture whatsoever. No government transfer of money. Instead, you can have opt-in state options. So if there's a certain thing that you want funded, that should be an option for you to opt into. You know what? I strongly believe in the SNAP program. I'm going to give, maybe a few percent of my income to that every month or every however long. And then that what that does though, and that's it forces you to put your money where your mouth is. And if the government's not taking your money, then what? Then you're just not a charitable person if you or what? I don't know. That opens up a whole nother can of worms on a bunch of judgments and things. But if people have the option to opt into what taxes they want to pay, because there's a whole lot of lefties out there, well, my taxes, I don't want them to pay for the government. That's not what I'm paying taxes for, to pay for the Army or to pay for ICE or to pay for whatever. Well, guess what? If you're a lefty and you pay taxes, that's too bad, too sad. That's what you don't get a choice in where your money goes as it stands right now. You just know that your income tax is going to the IRS. Where that money goes from there, yeah, we can go on different websites and see. Shit, foreign aid, yeah, to Israel. That's right. If you're a lefty and you're an Israel hater, yeah, we spend a lot of money every year. Saudi Arabia, yeah, almost every country on the planet gets money from us every year. There's a State Department website you can go to, or foreignaid.gov or something like that. Go check it out. And then it gives these bullshit charts of how that money's divided up, within that kind, for military assistance, for education, for infrastructure, for medical, this and that and the other, for agriculture. They call it that. They put a number, next to that, but the trick is here. There's zero oversight. Once that money goes to that country, that money's gone. We have we got no stake in that game anymore. And that's why when when we're subsidizing some third world African nation, if we're giving money to Burkina Faso, now I'm just using that as an example. I don't know that we are. I would guess that we are. But if we give, I don't know, $400 million to Burkina Faso, the president of Burkina Faso is going to be living very large. His staff is going to be living very large. Everybody else is still chopping off, people's arms and heads and doing kidnap for ransom and whatnot. But man, what if there was an opt-in for whatever tax you thought was important? Guess what? Then the government would have to look, okay, 360 million taxpayers, however many, let's say half of those opt in, because half of them be like, F that, I ain't paying no taxes to the government. I'll just pay for whatever services I want, whatever, and I'll give money to my church. Okay, whatever, that's fine. Let's say half of 360. So what is that? 165,000 people or a million people are paying tax, but they get to opt in on what taxes they're paying. Then the government gets to see what's important and what isn't to the American people. Now that's representative government right there, folks. Yeah, that's representative government right there. That'd be crazy, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be awesome? I think that would be so awesome. Now, I don't know a lot about blockchain. Here's what I know. I read, and I'm not talking about cryptocurrency. I'm just telling you that cryptocurrency runs on blockchain technology. I read Bitcoin Evangelism maybe 3 times already, and I still don't know about blockchain technology, I guess. But what I'm understanding is it's very secure, right? So if we had opt-in state-run opt-in options that were blockchain technology that would be able to help us with transparency and hacking and all those things, then we could put a on the IRS. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm all about getting rid of the IRS as well. And if the states were managing voluntary tax, yep, IRS is just a middleman who's taking money from you and giving it to somebody else. Phase it out, or at minimum, just skeletonize the IRS, just for auditing purposes, I guess, maybe. But that's what, I guess Treasury does that too, so I should do that. All right, I was going on about that. I like the idea of voluntary taxes, but voluntary opt-in for what you think's important. Well, you're just a peon. You don't know what's important. That's the way the government thinks. That's the way the elite class thinks. That's the way the academic class thinks. You're just a peon. You don't know what's important. We need your money, but you don't understand how important it is, the things we want to spend money on. So we're not going to give you that option. That's what's going on right now. Oh man. What about education? What did Bastiat have anything about education? Let's see. And I quote, "Education, like everything else, must be free and not forced. But in this second case, the law commits legal plunder by violating liberty and property. If it's replied that the people benefit from it, I answer that the people cannot benefit from a violation of their own rights. Force cannot produce anything in the moral realm except that which is immoral." That speaks directly to all this mandatory public school shit, or this truancy. Your kids have to be enrolled in some school, even if it's homeschool. They have to be, right? I'm not saying get rid of education. Don't get me wrong here. Don't confuse what I'm saying. I'm saying at what point, when and why did the government get involved in education? Now, modern politics. Now, we have debates about school vouchers, school of choice, right, to kind of fight against the public school monopolies and these freaking teachers unions and whatnot. Because, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, Public schools are just conformity factories. That is all they are. They're not producing exceptional people. The kids that are exceptional aren't getting that from school. They're getting that at home. They're getting that from other environmental factors. They're getting from public school is just conformity, and that conformity, stifles innovation. Yeah, and it stifles individuality. And if you got gifted students who are being neglected, and then you got challenged students that are being neglected, because public school doesn't deal with the extremes very well at all. So this push for in the 1830s, when they started pushing for the common school, and me and my daughter, we do agree on a couple things. Well, we agree on a lot of things, but Industrial Revolution created a need for these common schools, right? Because again, these are factory based. This whole model is a factory based model. And then when the schools, they got federalized. Now we talk about Department of Education, which came around 72, I want to say. But the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that came around in 1965, and that's when schools got federalized right there. And then you guys remember, I don't know, some of you who a little older, in 01, they had the No Child Left Behind. What was that? And then you had a shift in the Obama years to core something. I don't even remember what it was, but I remember they changed the way math was done. I remember that. At some point, they stopped teaching civics in school and started teaching social studies. And people equate social studies with, I guess, you get geography in there and stuff like that, but there was, well, I'll go with it. But at any rate, the federalization of public schools, what did that do? The same thing that everything that federalizes does. It ties you to money, to a budget that is, now you're beholden to the federal government. So here's what I got. Education Freedom Act, clean bill. Yep. Get rid of Department of Education completely at the federal level. K through 12 funding is a state responsibility for a public school, but that doesn't anything. Unrestricted block grants and full tax deductions for all educational expenses for both public, or all public, private, and homeschool, and all in between, charters and Montessori's, and all the different systems and styles, right? All education created or treated equally. Get rid of all federal curriculum mandates and give parents vouchers that are equal to per pupil spending, which, that's less and more depending on what districts you're in. But I want to say nationally, the average is somewhere around $13,000 per pupil per year. So if parents had portable vouchers, now look, that means school of choice. That means I don't care if I live in Rome. If I want to drive my kid to Chattanooga every morning to school, whatever, that's on me, right? But they can still go to school wherever we choose. And then when it comes to college, hey man, no more subsidies, no more government-backed student loans, and let the market dictate the tuition and not the government. Because as long as the government subsidizes, the tuition is going to keep going up. And then guess what you got when the tuition goes up? Then you got federal loans. You got school loans that got to be paid back. And guess what? This loan forgiveness business of just blanket saying, okay, well, if you owe college, you're off the hook. By that rationale, why wouldn't you do that for my house or my car or my business loan? Yeah. Education's good and important. And if we're getting proper education early, untainted by government coercion, federal government coercion. Well, and state too, but I mean, well, that's a whole nother state autonomy, 10th Amendment, all that stuff. That's a whole nother episode, but without any federal coercion is where I'm going right now. And that's just a few things. I mean, yeah, there's nuance to all that, and we could argue it all, but why's the government in the education business? There is no enumerated power that addresses education. That's what I mentioned earlier was with a giggle is they like to use that general welfare to promote the general welfare. Well, almost literally everything in the federal government right now falls under that little bitty 2-word statement, general welfare. All right, moving on. Moving on. Bastiat, I quote, now, legal plunder can be committed in an infinite number of ways. Thus, we have an infinite number of plans for organizing it. Tariffs, protections, benefits, subsidies, encouragements, progressive tax, public schools, guaranteed jobs, guaranteed profits, minimum wages. All of these plans as a whole constitute, socialism. Legal plunder has many names. Universal suffrage, free education, progressive taxation. The choice before us is 1, the few plunder the many, 2, everybody plunders everybody, or 3, nobody plunders anybody. Those are the choices. That's what we're given. That's what we're down to. What are we living today? Right now, libertarians would argue that the bipartisan sort of the two-party system is just two sides of the same coin, and it's all like socialism light. You know what I mean? The Republicans can say what they want. They are not for small government. They might be pro-business or pro, corporation like big business. I don't even know that they're necessarily pro-small business. Maybe. I guess if it's to do with their homies and their cronies. But yeah, we're living in socialism light right now. All these college students and high school students that want to criticize capitalism as the problem, we're not living in a free market society, folks. The government's had their dirty fingers in it at least since 1913. At least since 1913, even before. I don't know if you guys remember Ocasio-Cortez, the Green New Deal. That was outright overt plunder, folks. There wasn't even any subterfuge there. But where is there subterfuge? Tariffs, right? A lot of people bemoan tariffs. A lot of libertarians. Now, I would say the Democrats only bemoan tariffs because Trump is the one who's implementing this. If it was Biden or Obama or somebody, they wouldn't. So, because, the intellectual inconsistency that comes from the left. But tariffs are a form of protectionism and a tax. We do end up paying more for these higher taxed items that countries who import and things like that. We end up paying more for that. And both of those things, either all this environmental shit that they want to charge everybody everything for breathing air, you know what I mean? It's both of those things just fuel identity politics that just both voting blocks, right? The blues and the reds, they just want a piece of the pie. They look at everything as a fixed sum, and they want their piece of the pie to be bigger. That's what it is. And ultimately, whether it's red or blue, it's still the government taking money away from you. It's still the government devaluing your dollar, the dollars that are in your pocket. The Federal Reserve just made the dollar, fiat. They just made it fiat currency. And they did it to fund endless wars and endless deficits and whatever. And a good example of the fraud that came from that the printing of the money is all those COVID area stimuluses that went out in 20 and 21. 6 trillion plus bucks where people got checks, for these COVID, these personnel, whatever. I didn't get a check, but there's millionaires out there that got these interest-free loans that then got forgiven, or these business loans that, ultimately got forgiven because of this COVID stuff. You just claim, oh yeah, I lost employees, or I had whatever. And all that money that went out, all that did was just devalue your money. And our national debt shot up to somewhere, 35 trillion or so. And the higher that goes, the less your dollar's worth. And then when the Federal Reserve prints money, the less your dollar is worth. Well, what clean bill could we do? I don't know. Let's see. The balanced budget amendment that at least requires a balanced budget. But even then, let's say, if we're not in a time of war, which we always are, we're perpetually at war, right? But if we're not in a time of war, a declared war, there should be a surplus in our budget, right? But we should at least, via the law, require a balanced budget. Not loans, not debt, not in the red. And then there needs to be a serious, detailed audit of the Federal Reserve in order to phase it out. I don't want to hear, no, we're going to audit the Fed, then they audit it, and here's our findings, and then everything just goes on business as usual. There needs to be an audit of the Federal Reserve for the sole purpose to phase out the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve needs to go away. It's a product of evil. It is evil. And it keeps you and me at what modern day debt slaves, good people. We are debt slaves. And our grandkids are going to be feeling the pain way more than we are because of the Federal Reserve and because of their devaluing of money. We need to get back on a gold standard. Yep, we need to get back on the gold standard. Now, I know it was Nixon that took us off the gold standard in 70, but guess what? Back in the 30s, what happened? Does anybody know what happened under the glorious leader FDR? FDR was a communist, good people, essentially. What happened under FDR when it come to gold? Yeah, he essentially mandated, not essentially, he did mandate that all people turn in all gold, unless it was some like rare coin thing, but like gold as tender, all and mass, masses of gold. All gold was to be turned into the federal government to be collected and stored, I guess, at Fort Knox, right? And then they paid, chump change, pennies on a dollar as a compensation for that. But even though the dollar was still on the gold standard, technically, that essentially took the dollar off the gold standard in practice back in the 30s. And then it just got solidified in the 70s. So there you go. The dollar. This is one of my favorite arguments to hear people who shit on Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is just made up and it's not backed by anything. Well, what is the dollar? What the fuck is a federal note? What does that mean? What is the dollar backed by? The word of the Federal Reserve? What does that mean to me? That doesn't mean anything to me. There's not a human being. Well, that's not true. There's probably, I would say, conservatively, 10 human beings in Washington, D.C. that I would trust. The rest of them could go take a flying leap. I don't trust a single thing that comes out of any of those offices. So tell me, what backs the dollar, good people? What makes the dollar more valuable than Bitcoin? Well, the dollar's not more valuable than Bitcoin. I don't know what is Bitcoin at right now. Well, I can't find my phone. Oh, there it is. I'm gonna see what where's Bitcoin at right now. And I invest in Bitcoin, folks. I do. I believe that it's a good thing. I trust it. I like the idea that it's I like the idea of the blockchain stuff. I like, let's see, where's it at? Bitcoin. Oh, it's pretty low. I need to buy. It's at $68,000 right now. One Bitcoin is worth $68,000. Now that's down considerably. It hit $100,000. Let's look at the last year. Yeah. So 68,000. Now in a lifetime, let's look at the lifetime. No, we can't get a lifetime. Only over the past 5 years can I see. So over the past 5 years, Bitcoin is up $20,000. It goes up and down, but at any rate, I encourage you to read, excuse me, Bitcoin Evangelism by, I can't remember the guy. I think his name is Dement. I can't remember the guy's name. Bitcoin Evangelism. Anyway, yeah. And that's finite. There is scarcity there. I think every 4 years they do what's called a halvening. So they decrease the amount of Bitcoin being what they call mined. And at some point, there is going to be a finite amount of Bitcoin in existence. And that right there is going to skyrocket the value of that Bitcoin. So anyway, it has value as much. Yeah. I wish I could figure out how to take Bitcoin on my website right now. I'm going to eventually do that. I've got other priorities at the moment, but all right. Anyway, enough about Bitcoin. Enough about that. The Federal Reserve needs to go away. Clean. Let's see. Yep. Where we at? Plunder audits. Well, yeah, every agency should be audited. Now, check that out. That's not practical to audit every agency. Now, I don't know if I said this. I've done a trial and error on a couple of podcasts here with the numbers. There are somewhere around 450 agencies and sub-agencies in the federal government. And that's not all, folks. That's just like major agencies and then sub-agents, a few major subs. There's still offices below those. And anyway, let's just say 450 is a number. That's 450 budgets. Yeah, it is. Oh, no, Edgar, there's a budget for this and then, blah, blah, blah. No, man. That's 450 budgets. That's 450 directors and assistant or deputy directors, and each with a staff and whatever secretaries and whatever agents that enforce whatever that agency deals with. And there's so much redundancy in there, and it's such garbage. Every one of them have a budget, folks. And guess who pays it? Well, if we could opt in on where our taxes go, that would change. Yeah, I want to see agency audits. Like every 2-4 year. Well, a cycle of audits. That would take a government agency of an army of auditors just to audit all the government agencies. How long would it take to get through 450 agencies? A few years? Probably a couple years. Anyway, man, it's madness. The government is a behemoth, and it's out of control. And it exists just to continue existing. How can we bring more into the government without producing anything? That's what does the government produce, folks? It doesn't produce anything. Now, the Navy and Air Force have all these big, sexy planes. The government doesn't build those. The government spends billions of dollars to Lockheed and Sikorsky and all these other, and I don't even know who the shipbuilders are. I can't even imagine. Everybody always talks about how expensive a fighter jet is. How much does one of these goddamn carriers cost? I don't know, man. But guess what? At very minimum, Congress is mandated to maintain a Navy. So that's at least some justification, isn't it? But what about all this other shit? That's madness. All right. I've gone on. I've ranted enough. Bastiat, I encourage you to read The Law. It's short. It's very short. It reads very quick. But based on what he said, what we've chosen, what we're living in America today is of those three options I gave you. We're living in option number 2 where everybody plunders everybody. But the government is the arm of that. And it breeds conflict. It breeds conflict amongst the two sides because each side is just looking to see how much they can get out of it. They see it as a finite piece of pie and they want their piece to be bigger. And that's what pure democracy is, folks. Whoever's got the biggest piece of the pie dictates, life for everybody else. But we need to be living under option number 3, right? Nobody plunders anybody. Everybody's free and uncoerced and uncompelled to create and build and work for their own ends and to be charitable as they choose and to build and to educate as they choose. Yeah, it's simple. It's economical. It has limited government coercion. It's not oppressive, right? What about the poor people, Edgar? Look, given the opportunity, if everybody listening to this right now, if you had $10 million, would you give to some charity? Would you donate a sizable amount to some, whether it's a children's hospital or a homeless shelter or homeless veterans, or would you? Think about that. Now, there's a big segment of society that wouldn't, folks, but there's also a big segment that would. Folks, right now we are in a hyper-polarized political landscape. That's the way it is. If we had clean bills, we would be able to pass meaningful, easily understood, meaningful laws that were nonpartisan because they would have to be, there wouldn't be any wheeling and dealing in the back rooms. It would be, this is the vote. How do you vote? That's it. And it would sort of create, it would tamp down this polarization. And we could get back to sort of a nonpartisan, well, the government's always been partisan, it always will be, but we need to get out of the two-party thing anyway. Clean bills, I think, would empower individuals because you can write a letter to your congressman and go, "Hey, man, this Educational Freedom Act, I want it passed, and here's why." If you do that right now, the way bills are, there's so much shit in there that he's already wheeled and dealed on. He's just going to be, your concerns are noted, but you don't understand the complexities, blah, blah, blah. Well, if they're clean bills, folks, you would have a little more juice with your representative. I believe that. Yeah, I believe that. So look, folks, here's what I'm asking of you. Here, read The Law from Frederick Bastiat. And then, hit me up on thejuntopodcast.com and what would your clean bill be? Do you have something that you think would change the face of politics or that would be good for America, like as a whole, that, you'd put through the clean bill process to where there's no secret projects in there. There's no secret, well, we got to fund abortion for the next 20 years in order to vote for freedom of education. You know what I mean? What would your clean bill be? What do you think would be good for America? That all of America, not just one segment of America, all of America. I don't know, folks. Write me, hit me up. Let me know. I want your feedback. I'm always soliciting your feedback. Tell me what you think about the things we're talking about here. Tell me, do you think I'm a nug and that I'm just mumbling my way through podcast after podcast? Or do you see, or am I tickling some some critical thought there. I don't know. The Law by Frederick Bastiat, 1850. Read it. Send me your proposal for a clean bill. There you go, folks. I appreciate you guys listening. I really do. I got a few diehard listeners. And for those of you out there, thank you so much. I love you guys. You guys are awesome for immediately listening to my podcasts when I put them out. I just put one out about alcoholism and things like that. I felt pretty good about it. Give me your feedback on it, though. And other than that, just check out our other stuff, the shooting stuff and the training stuff. Yeah. And just hit me up. Drop me a line. Just say hello. I love you guys. Take care.